Okay, hi everyone. I'm here with your 413 lesson, How Does It Grow? Connecting Linear Rules and Graphs. Follow along as I read the introduction. You have been looking at geometric patterns and ways in which those patterns can be represented with XY tables, graphs, and equations. In lesson 412, you worked with 4 different tile patterns and looked for connections between the geometric shapes and the numbers in the equations. Today you will go back to those 4 equations and look for the connections to other representations. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to answer the following target questions. How is the growth shown in a graph? How is the growth shown in a rule? How can you determine the number of tiles in figure 0 from a graph? How can you determine which tile pattern grows faster from a graph? So we're going to start with question 422. 422 says examine your lesson 412 resource page, pattern analysis, and obtain a 413 resource page from your teacher, or explore using the 422 student e-tool Desmos. Click in the lower right corner of the graph to view it in full screen mode. Part A says make sure you have a rule for each tile pattern. So we should, from class yesterday, you should have the rules for the tile pattern, so you need to make sure that you get out the resource page that looks like this, okay? And make sure that you have a rule for each tile pattern that we talked about yesterday. Part B says complete the table for each rule. So if you take a look, now you're on today's resource page. You need to go in, and we did tile patterns 2, 3, and 4. You will need to make your rules for those tables. Let me rephrase that. You need to fill in those tables for the tile patterns. Go ahead and pause the video and do that. If you're back with me, that means you have completed your tables. Part C says create a graph for each pattern. Put all patterns on the same set of axes. Use different colors for each pattern, matching the color you use to show the tile pattern's growth on the lesson 412 resource page. So you will need the same colors that you used yesterday when you were coloring in which tiles were being added, and that is what you are plotting the points with. So if you used blue for tile pattern 2, when you're graphing tile pattern 2's line down here on the bottom of the resource page, you need to also be using blue. So go ahead and pause the video and graph on the resource page. All of them are going on this graph. You do not need separate graphs. If you're back with me, that means you have finished questions or part C. Part D says examine how the growth appears in the pattern, in the table, in the graph, and in the rule. So go ahead and answer that question right now. Okay, if you're back with me, you have answered part D. We're going to save that, and we're going to talk about those in class. I'm sorry. You have part E as well. What connections do you see between these representations? Describe any connections you see. So go ahead and answer that one. And if you're back with me, you've answered part E. Like I said, we're going to save 422 and talk about it in class. So we're going to move on to 423. The graph at right gives information about 3 new tile patterns. Remember that in this course, the tile patterns will be considered to be elements of continuous relationships and thus will be graphed with a continuous line or curve. Answer the following questions as a team. A, what information does the circle point O, or just the circle, on the graph tell you about tile pattern A? So go ahead and answer that question right now. If you're back with me, you have answered this question. Hopefully you said that the circle tells you that in figure 4, or in pattern A, because we're talking about tile pattern A, figure 4 has 10 tiles. Part B says, find the growth of each tile pattern. For example, how much does tile pattern A increase from one figure to the next? Explain how you know. So you're going to answer this question for pattern A, pattern B, pattern C. Okay, go ahead and answer that. Okay, let's talk about this. So if we're looking at tile pattern A, here's my graph line for tile pattern A. We know at figure 0 that we had 2 tiles. At figure 1, we had 4 tiles. At figure 2, we had 6 tiles. So you could say that pattern A grows by 2 tiles for every 1 figure. Every time we're increasing by 1 on the x-axis, we're increasing by 2 on the y-axis. Pattern B. So we know for pattern B, here's our line, that at tile pattern 0, we have 8 tiles. Tile pattern 1, we have 10 tiles. Tile pattern 2, we have 12 tiles. Again, we are growing by 2 tiles for every 1 figure. In pattern C, it also starts at 0, 2, so tile pattern 0 has 2 tiles. Tile pattern 1 has 6. Tile pattern 2 has 10. So here, it grows by 4 tiles for every 1 figure. Part C says, look at the lines for tile patterns A and B. What is the same about the 2 lines? What conclusion can you make about these tile patterns? What is different about the lines? What does this tell you about the tile patterns? Use what you see on the graph to justify your answers. So go ahead and pause the video and answer question part C. If you're back with me, you've answered part C. We're going to save part C for class. And if you flip it over, you have one more part, part D. Look at lines A and C on the graph. What do these 2 lines have in common? In what ways are the lines different? What does this tell you about the tile patterns? Explain completely. So you're going to finish up the video by answering this question. And we are also going to save this question just like we did part C to go over in class. So please answer part D, and then once you have completed your lesson for today. As always, if you have any questions, please email us. Make sure you take pictures and upload your notes to the assignment on Google Classroom.